Okay, welcome to Color Contrast, addressing the orange elephant in the room. This webinar is put on by the University of Vermont Office of Accessibility Services. If you want to find the materials we'll be going over today, you can go to go.uvm.edu/color-contrast. Today's learning goal is that we are hoping you will learn how to measure color contrast and find out if your color contrast meets WCAG requirements. We are going to be going over four separate things. First, we're going to talk about what is color contrast. Next, we're going to talk about how do you measure color contrast. Then we're going to talk about working with color contrast and images. And finally, we're going to talk about working with the University of Vermont official color palette and some things to be aware of in regards to those colors and color contrast. First up, though, what is color contrast? Here we go. Here is how eyeballs work. I've got a very rudimentary diagram of an eyeball on the screen. If you look at your eyeball in a mirror, you'll see that there's a white part surrounding an iris, the colored bit, and in the center of the iris is a hole where light actually comes in through that hole. There's a little bag of jelly over that covers the hole, and that bag of jelly is called the lens. So the way it works is that light comes in through the lens, the bag of jelly, and it hits what are known as rods and cones inside your eyeball. Now, your eyeball is connected to an optic nerve. Each of them has a separate optic nerve that runs through your head. And as light comes in through the lens, it hits the rods and cones, and then the rods and cones describe what the light is presenting to the optic nerve. And rods describe light and dark, shades of lightness and darkness. And cones describe color qualities. Now, it takes three different kinds of cones to describe the spectrum of colors in the world. You have red, green, and blue cones in a general eyeball setting. But the rods vastly outnumber the cones inside your eyeball. You have, in general, 120 million rods. Those are the things that describe light and dark, and just 5 million cones nestled in there among the rods. And the cones are what describe shades of color. Now, vision itself and vision disabilities are pretty complicated. You have so many different types of vision disabilities that are possible, largely due to the presence or absence and the number of cones that are inside your eyeballs. Not everyone has red, green, and blue cones. Some people only have red and green cones. Some people have no cones whatsoever. Those folks have what's known as monochromacy. They can only see in shades of gray, right? So gray described by lightness and darkness because they have rods but no cones. There are many, many different color disabilities out there in the world. And that's why color itself can be really complicated. On the right-hand side of the screen, I have a dress that to me appears to be in shades of blue and black. But this dress went viral a couple of years ago because apparently some people perceive this dress as being in shades of gold. And some people, like myself, see it as blue and black. That's a very wide range of impressions for one particular photo. And that means that when you are working with color and color contrast, there are a number of different ways that people may interpret your colors. So, when we are designing with color, we are designing for people, not just eyeballs. So, people can have permanent vision disabilities. These can be inherited, they can be acquired, and they can be uncorrected color blindness and low vision. Low vision is something that you can be born with. Some people are born with just not as much vision as others. Other people, as they age, will lose a lot of their vision. Some people are born with color blindness. We saw all those various different types of color blindness. And some people acquire eye injuries that don't resolve that can damage their ability to see color. We're also designing for people with temporary disabilities. Those can be dilated pupils, like when you go to the optometrist. They dilate your pupils, they make the lens a lot bigger so that your optometrist can see inside your eyeball to check for injuries. And after that exam, it takes a while for your lens to shrink back down. And during that time, because the lens is so big, it's letting in way, way more light than you are potentially used to, and everything feels a little washed out. Everything is a little much. You can also have temporary color blindness due to head injury, some concussions, traumatic brain injuries. Sometimes alcohol use, prolonged or traumatic, can induce temporary color blindness, and diabetes also sometimes brings with it color blindness. You can also get color blindness temporarily from eye strain or fatigue. This one is really important because at UVM, Student Accessibility Services is seeing a huge uptick in the number of students who are looking for assistive technology to help them avoid looking at their screens for long periods of time because they are reporting that screens are causing them more eye strain. Screens are causing them headaches. Screens are causing them dizziness, in addition to various types of vision upset. And then there's also, we are designing for people who have situational disabilities. This can be reading a screen in bright sunlight or reading a screen while trying to do three other things, like when your attention is very divided and it's hard to keep your eyes on a screen. Think about if you were cooking dinner, for instance, and one of your kids was trying to show you something on their device. You're looking to the device and you're looking back in the pot to make sure it doesn't boil back and forth, back and forth. So you're maybe only getting a little slice of what's on the screen each time. That's a situational disability. Now, what does WCAG say about color contrast? WCAG, as we previously discussed, are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. At the University of Vermont, we need to abide by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 double A level. So that's what we're going to be talking about here in terms of color contrast. First of all, the WCAG says that you cannot use color alone to convey meaning because if somebody doesn't have access to color, they're not going to understand the meaning. On the left-hand side of the screen, I have a pie chart in brightly colored slices that has percentages layered over the top of each slice. And there's a caption that reads, Todd's sales are shown in red and Melissa's sales are shown in green. But what if you can't see red or green? What if you have monochromacy? You can only see shades of gray. Those two words, red and green, are not going to make any sense to you. And that's why that would be a violation of the WCAG standards for accessibility. Instead, you want to separate color from meaning. Same pie chart here on screen, except the caption has been changed to read, Todd's sales were 11%, and Melissa's sales were 45% of our quarterly total. In the pie chart, the numbers have been layered over the pie slices so that you can, if you can discern text, you're able to discern those numbers. And if you aren't able to discern text, then we know that we would have included alt text to that pie chart to help you understand where the numbers lie on the chart. And that would actually meet the WCAG guidelines for using color along with other types of indicators for meaning. Now, when WCAG addresses color contrast, it gets very specific. We are only going to talk about WCAG levels AA and AAA in this webinar because single level A level is only for the bare minimum that we have to meet for accessibility. And at UVM, we need to meet AA level because we are a public entity. We can exceed AA level, but that is where we need to come in at. So the WCAG states that the color contrast ratio between text and its background for AA level must be 4.5 to 1. For large text, it should be 4.5 to 1 as well. And then for icons and graphics, you only need to have a 3 to 1 color contrast ratio. The AAA level for WCAG indicates that small text should have a 7:1 color contrast ratio, and large text, again, is back at that 4.5:1 color contrast ratio, and icons and graphics remain at 3:1. That's a lot. Let's unpack it. We are not going to do math in this webinar. First of all, large text is defined by the WCAG Success Criteria 1.4.3 as text that is at least 18 point regular or 24 pixels, or it can be 14 point bold, which typically equates to 18.5 to 19 pixels. A lot of times we measure font size in points when we're dealing with documents and in pixels when we're dealing with web pages, and both of those items are subject to the color contrast guidelines as laid out by the WCAG. This is hugely important, and it happens all the time that people aren't meeting these color contrast ratios. Color contrast errors are one of the most common accessibility errors across the web. There is a group out of Utah State University called WebAIM, and each year they measure the accessibility errors on the top 1 million homepages on the internet. And every single year that they've been measuring, low contrast text comes up as one of the most common accessibility errors they find. It's also one of the most common errors we find in the Office of Accessibility Services at UVM. So we did a micro audit of websites, documents, multimedia, social media, and newsletters in fall 2025. And almost across the board, we found that there are color contrast issues in a lot of items at UVM, most specifically in documents, in social media posts, and in newsletters. So we know that it's a problem. Now, how are you going to measure the ratios to know that you're meeting the standards? Again, I promise you that we are not going to do any math in this webinar. The Office of Accessibility Services at the University of Vermont strongly recommends the TPGI Color Contrast Analyzer. Those words, color and analyzer, in its name. Color is spelled with a U, analyzer is spelled with an S because it's an international group. The TPGI Color Contrast Analyzer. It is standalone software that is free for Mac and Windows. And what it does is it will give you the hex value, a number consisting of 6 places, either numbers or letters, and it gives you that hex value of any pixel on your screen. Pixels on screens are described by these hex values, a 6-place combination of numbers and letters that describes so very many colors. And the TPGI Color Contrast Analyzer automatically calculates whether a given set of 2 pixels meets the WCAG AA levels for regular test or large test, or fails those levels. And the way that it works is once you've installed the color contrast analyzer, you're going to open it up. And I have a screenshot here on the right-hand side of my screen showing the interface for the color contrast analyzer. And I've circled where there are eyedropper icons, put little arrows to show you where the circles go. You're going to use those eyedroppers to actually sample 2 pixels. You're going to sample a text pixel, and you're going to sample the background of the text, the background that the text is laid against. And when you have gotten both pieces of data, a pixel value from the text and a pixel value from the background, the color contrast analyzer will automatically calculate the difference between the two and give you a failure or a passing rate. You just have to have some idea of whether the text involved is large text, regular text, or you can also do this for UI components such as icons and graphics. So let's practice how we could measure color contrast using this tool. Now, I have a couple of examples here. This first example is from UVM's campus radio station, WRUV. It is a graphic that was posted on social media advertising a fund drive. So I'm going to pull up my color contrast analyzer. I have it kept here in the dock because I use it pretty much all the time. Here it has popped up. I'm going to move it off to the side so we can keep seeing. So the foreground color, I'm going to sample the text available. I'm going to start with the big text that says WRUV pledge drive. That definitely counts as 18-point regular or 14-point bold. So let's just go ahead and grab our eyedropper. You can see the eyedropper opens up a magnifying lens. We're gonna look for the darkest part of the text. Okay, I got it. You'll see now that the color contrast analyzer has come up with a hex value. And then I'm gonna take the background and I'm just gonna grab the lightest part I can grab. Okay, so the color contrast analyzer says that if this is regular size text, then the color combination fails double A level color contrast. But if it's large text, it passes. So we know that the large text in this graphic passes. Let's also sample the small text down at the bottom of the screen. So again, we're going to go down, look for a dark part of the graphic, and that gives us a foreground color. Look for a light part of the background, doink. And so the color contrast analyzer has generated a new set of ratio, and it says that the contrast ratio for this smaller text is 3.7 to 1. And that's not good enough for small text, for regular text. Regular text we know has to be 4.5 to 1 to pass. So we know that this particular item has some work that needs to be done to it in the small text. Let's keep going. Remember Todd versus Melissa? Well, I designed that pie chart for a very particular reason, and that's because even though we eventually wound up using a caption that helped us unpack color from meaning, I'm not sure that we actually managed to create an accessible pie chart. So let's measure. Going to take the numbers. The numbers were laid out in white. In this first slice of the pie, the yellow slice, okay, that fails across the board. The contrast is 1.7 to 1, not remotely good enough. So we know that we'd have to redo that slice. You can take a look at some of your other slices, the gray slice. Okay, you're going to have to make a judgment call here about the large text versus regular text. I would say I wouldn't leave it to chance. I would darken that gray so that we bring it up to a better contrast. And you can look at some of your options here by clicking on the sliders, and then you can darken the individual color to see when you're actually going to get to a color that passes muster. Okay, if I were to go back and fix that pie chart, the color contrast analyzer has shown me that this particular hex combination, if I apply it to the wedge in the pie chart, it will meet my requirements for color contrast. This turns up in the most unlikely places. So this got a link to the National Autism Center Standards Report, got a screenshot of the front cover of that report. I want to see that all of the lettering actually meets color contrast. So again, background colors, white. We can see now in the color contrast analyzer, because both data fields are the same, the contrast ratio is 1 to 1. That fails entirely. So anything that we do that is not white on white or the same color on the same color will improve that. Okay, so part of the title does meet color contrast guidelines. It's 5.3 to 1, and you can see that that meets the requirements. Although if you were trying to hit AAA requirements, it doesn't pass for regular text. I would say the title text is probably large text, however. Let's double check that the rest of it works. The national standards. Oh, we're down at 1.3 to 1. So part of that title doesn't pass. So if I was the graphic designer on this project, I would do a little tweaking there with my green to make it actually pass the recommendation. So how does this impact when you are working with the UVM color palette? Great question. UVM has 6 official colors. We have 2 main colors, catamount green, a dark forest green. So listen to the words that I'm using to describe these colors. Dark forest green. Dark, that's my rods talking, judging how dark or light the color is. Green, that's my cones talking, telling me what color is on the screen. I happen to be somebody who does not have color blindness, so I'm able to make those judgment calls. But as you talk about colors, note the terms that you're using. The other official color for UVM is gold, a rich, deep yellow. We also have four secondary colors: Vermont slate, which is a dark blue; sky blue, which is a vibrant, mid-range blue; old mill, which is a deep, rich orange; and morning fog, which is a very, very light gray. Now, not all of these colors work with all text colors, and not all of them work as text on various backgrounds. And that's what I like to refer to as the orange elephant in the room. I have on the screen an AI generated image of an orange elephant, a large orange elephant cuddling a brown armadillo toy as he stands inside a snowy greenhouse. This is the orange elephant in the room. That not all color combinations can be used with the UVM color palette, but let's look at how to make this work. So if you are using a catamount green background, you can use gold for any size text. You cannot use Vermont slate for any text. Vermont slate does not work for large text and it does not work for small text. Sky blue works for large text only. Old Mill, that orange does not work for regular text or large text. And Morning Fog, the very, very light gray, works for all text, regular and large, on a catamount green, a dark green background. And I've done this for each of the different colors in the color palette. On a gold background, you can use either catamount green or Vermont slate for either regular text or large text. Sky blue does not work for any type of text on a gold background. Old Mill does not work for any text on a gold background, and neither does Morning Fog. That gold background, really difficult to get color contrast right if you're sticking within the color UVM color palette. If it's a Vermont slate background, the deep blue, you cannot use catamount green for text on a dark blue background. Dark green on a dark blue background, very hard to see. But morning fog, the light gray or the gold, that works for any size text. On a Vermont slate background, sky blue actually works for all text. It has enough contrast that it's going to give you robust contrast against the Vermont slate background. Old Mill will work for large text only, not for regular text, and Morning Fog works for all text. On sky blue backgrounds, catamount green can only be used for large text. Gold does not work for any text. Don't believe me? Let's pull out the color contrast analyzer. We're going to grab some gold here. Grab. And then we're going to use the eyedropper to grab sky blue. And the background, no, it feels very bright. It feels like it should work. But our color contrast analyzer did the math for us and shows that it actually doesn't work. Vermont slate works for both regular and large text. Old Mill, orange on a sky blue background, does not work for regular or large text. And Morning Fog, surprisingly, does not work for any text on a sky blue background. Let's measure that to make sure. So we can go grab our Morning Fog. Doink. And again, it looks bright to my eyes, but having the color contrast analyzer do the math for me, it's actually going to not have enough contrast to cover all those different color blindness possibilities. Old Mill, our orange. Catamount green does not work for any text on an orange background. Gold does not work for any text on an orange background. I encourage you to measure these yourself with the color contrast analyzer. Vermont slate works for large text only. Morning fog works for large text. And sky blue does not work for any text against an Old Mill background. So again, the orange elephant in the room is that this orange is pretty hard to work with in terms of text. There's nothing else in the UVM color palette that's going to work with an orange background for regular size text. So you might want to think about that when you're designing. And then finally, morning fog. Gold does not work. It does not work to have yellow against light gray, but Catamount Green and Vermont Slate both work for regular and large text. Sky Blue does not work for any size text, and neither does Orange. So, again, I encourage you to measure these with your color contrast analyzer. Check my work to make sure that I got this all correct. And then on a plain white background, so many graphic designers know that the easiest combination to work with is black and white. Why might that be? I wonder what the color contrast is between black and white. They are diametrically opposed on the color wheel. One is all the colors and the other is no colors. Okay. That has a 21-to-1 color contrast ratio. That is the highest color contrast ratio that you can achieve. And it also is not always the best color contrast to use when you're designing for a screen, it turns out, because for some people it is too much. It is too much of a contrast and can hurt their eyes. We are learning more and more about eyeballs and the way that they interact with screens every single day as we become a society that uses screens more often, that spends so much time in front of screens. Turns out human eyeballs were not actually designed to stare at lighted frames of glass all day long. But on a plain white background, Catamount Green works for any size text, as does Vermont Slate. And then Morning Fog and Sky Blue do not work for any size text, and Gold does not work for any size text. So Old Mill works for large text only, that orange there sneaking in on the plain white background. You do not have to memorize this in the least, but you should have the color contrast analyzer at the ready as you design so that you can measure what's going on with your designs. And remember, you can tweak the transparency of the UVM color palette in order to get different colors. So in this table that we saw earlier about accessibility errors at UVM, I used Catamount Green at 0% transparency for the top bar. That means it's at full strength. And then I dialed the color back by 95%. It's at 95% transparency for the rows underneath, and it's a very, very light green there. And so those two transparencies have very different hex values. Let's pull up the color contrast analyzer. So the hex value of Catamount Green at full strength is 164734. The hex value for Catamount Green at 5% strength is F4, F6, F5. And actually, the contrast between the two is really good, 9.7-1. And so you could have the full strength Catamount Green against the 5% transparency Catamount Green if you wanted to. Remember, otherwise, black text on full strength Catamount Green would not work. But when you make it more transparent, it completely changes the colors. Yes, it would be handy to have all of these reminders about the UVM color palette as to what works and what doesn't for text as a checklist. I've got you covered there. Go to go.uvm.edu/color-contrast-checklist, and you can download a PDF of all the combinations of text and backgrounds that we just covered. Print it out. Get it to the color printer and print it out. Tack it up in your office so that you can use it as a cheat sheet. I also want to remind folks that color contrast can affect complicated graphics. It is really hard to make sure that text is entirely legible against a photo. Photo backgrounds have many, 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 many different values of pixels in them. So it is something you are also going to have to measure. Color contrast can absolutely affect captions. The digital accessibility scholar Emmanuel Bouffe did a fantastic presentation at Paris Web a couple of years ago about how color contrast can affect captions and the readability of captions in general. On screen on the left, I have a screenshot of a gentleman speaker standing in front of a light gray background, and unfortunately, the captions are overlaid in light gray. They are basically unreadable. I think they have a black outline to all the letters. It is not helping whatsoever. This is unreadable. In the screenshot to the right, I have a different screen cap from Emmanuel Bouffe's presentation showing a speaker the lower part of his face and his shirt. And the captions are in medium blue, almost a sky blue. And they are all illegible as well, even though the text size is pretty large. But it's just not able to be read. I mean, the speaker's shirt is gray and blue, and the captions are blue. There's also green grass behind them. So it's just not working. More than anything, however, I want you all to remember that color contrast affects people. People carrying around all these different eyeballs that can do all these different things and have different needs. And that's why we want to spend all this time thinking about our color contrast ratios. Now, finally, I'm going to wrap things up. Uh, Number one is you are doing great. Grant yourself grace as a learner. Just showing up for webinars like these is a fantastic start, and you did fantastic getting all the way to the end here. Number two is I want you to try something and see how it works out. Take one thing from this presentation and try it for 30 days. Maybe you're not going to work on your own color contrast ratios. Maybe you're just going to measure color contrast ratios until you feel comfortable with the color contrast analyzer. Just try that for 30 days. Write it on a post-it. Tack it up on your laptop screen. Give it a shot. And finally, I just want to thank you for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time to learn about color contrast and how it affects accessibility and the lives of people with disabilities.